The first lie Elara ever loved was this: if you are kind and patient, the world will reward you. By the time the tax collector came to their crooked little cottage at the edge of the woods, she finally learned what that lie cost. As a child, she had devoured stories, torn, smoke-stained pages hidden under her straw mattress. Tales where powerless girls were seen, chosen, rescued. Where a prince could look at nobody and say, "You're worth everything." Elara believed in those stories even when her life refused to match them. Even when the moon refused to answer her blood. Even when her mate cast her aside, telling her that a woman who could not give him pups was no wife at all. And that was the second lie she'd swallowed. If you cannot bear children, you have no worth. Tonight's story begins on the day both lies shattered. The doorframe shuddered when he stepped into it. The beta of the Iron Fang pack filled their doorway like a living wall, his shoulders nearly brushing the beams, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of their cottage. Behind him, a pale winter sun tried to force its way past his bulk and failed. Elara stood in the shadows near the hearth, hands still covered in flour from kneading bread that would likely be taken from them. She watched her father clutch her younger sister Lisa close, shielding the girl as if the beta might lunge for her at any second. Which, in this kingdom, was never an unreasonable fear. "The taxes have doubled this season," the beta said. His voice rumbled through the small home like distant thunder. "By direct decree of Alpha King Kalen." Her father's shoulders hunched, his skin sheened with sweat despite the bitter chill. Like every villager within Iron Fang territory, human or wolf, he feared the king whose temper was legend, whose cruelty was whispered in taverns. Wolves still had pack law to shield them from the worst excesses. Humans, on the other hand, were property with legs. And Elara? She was something even lower. Born to two strong shifters, she had never shifted herself. No wolf beneath her skin. No answering howl in her blood. A hollowborn, they called it when they were being polite. A defect, when they weren't. Twice marked with shame, wolfless, and then barren. Her mate had sent her back like a broken tool after 5 years of empty womb and silent nights. Her father had taken her in again, but his eyes never hid the bitterness. Another mouth. No dowry. A failed daughter. "My lord," her father began, voice cracking. We've had a poor harvest. The blight took half the grain, and the creek froze early. If you could only grant us more time. You know the penalty for failing to pay," the beta cut in. He didn't bother to look at Elara. His gaze wandered past her father and settled on Lisa, who flinched and pressed her face deeper into his chest. Lisa could already feel her wolf. Strong. Sure. Precious. "The king requires new servants," the beta mused aloud. "This one will do nicely." Elara's stomach turned to ice. Everyone knew what the king's servants truly meant. Young women taken through the iron gates of Kalen's fortress and never seen again. Some said they were used in his bed. Some said his dungeons were full of them. No one knew. No one dared to ask. "But she is promised," her father protested, arms tightening around Lisa. "Her wolf is strong. She will bear powerful cubs for the pack." His voice thinned and faltered. Elara saw the exact moment his mind leaped for another option. His gaze snapped to where she stood in the shadows, as if remembering she existed. She straightened instinctively, spine stiffening in a useless attempt at dignity. "Take my eldest instead," he said. There was no tremor in those words. No hesitation. He might as well have been offering up a worn-out chair. The beta's lip curled. You offer the king a defective half-breed, he said, finally deigning to glance her way. His eyes raked over her with clinical disinterest. She is already proven useless for breeding, her father replied, every word a blade that sank into her chest. Her mate cast her off. She's no good for a pack. But for a slave? He shrugged. Practically human, and barren besides. No loss to the wolves. No loss to the pack. The phrase sliced deeper than anything else. As if she had never belonged to it at all. The beta rolled the words on his tongue with cruel amusement. No loss to the pack, perhaps, he agreed. But what gain to the king? From the safety of their father's arms, Lisa blurted, she tells stories. Elara flinched. Lisa shrank when the beta's gaze snapped to her, but the girl forced herself to continue, small chin trembling. Beautiful stories. About queens and wolves and magic. Everyone listens when she tells them. How many times had those same stories been mocked? How often had her father sneered that wasting time on human tales only proved how broken she was? They had laughed at her stories, until now, when suddenly they remembered them as currency. Her father grabbed Elara's arm, dragging her forward so hard her knee nearly buckled. Show him, he hissed. Tell him yourself. He pushed her down to her knees on the packed dirt floor like an offering at an altar. For one breath, Elara allowed herself to grieve. For the father who chose convenience over love. For the mate who chose lineage over loyalty. For the body that refused to do what everyone had told her made a woman worthwhile. Then, the grief froze. Hardened. Turned to something like clarity. If you go, a cold little voice said inside her, no one will ever ask you for children again. She lifted her head, meeting the beta's eyes without flinching. I would be honored to serve Alpha King Kalan in whatever way he desires, my lord, she said, and managed to keep the bitterness from clawing up into her voice. The beta studied her, head tilted slightly. There was a calculating glint behind the laziness in his posture, a predator assessing meat. Very well, he said at last. The defective one will do. He turned on his heel and strode outside, his form rippling and expanding, bones cracking, fur bursting from skin. In a breath, a massive charcoal wolf stood where the man had been, gold eyes burning like twin coals. No one looked at her as she was marched out of the house. Not her father. Not Lisa. The little girl kept her face hidden, and Elara refused to look back. The tales had taught her one thing that was still true: looking over your shoulder never changed the ending. As she swung up onto the beta's broad wolf back, chains cold around her wrists, Elara made herself a quiet promise. If I am going to disappear into a monster's castle, I'll take my own story with me. Tonight, in whatever cold cell awaited, she would imagine a world where her father regretted his choice. Where Lisa had screamed and clung and refused to let them take her. Where being wolfless didn't make a woman worthless. Where a womb that would not quicken did not define a life. She was good at crafting happy endings. Especially because they never came true. If you're already hooked by Elara being traded like a defective object, hit subscribe so you don't miss on other stories. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done in her place? Run, fight, or accept? Now, back to the castle that eats girls alive. Dawn came as a knife of pale light over the mountains. By the time the beta's wolf form slowed to a prowl, Elara's legs were numb from hours of gripping fur, and her fingers had long since lost feeling in the iron cuffs. When he stopped, she forced herself to look up. The king's fortress pierced the sky like a bone-white fong. It rose from the cliffside, all white marble and silver stone, its towers glittering in the early light as if carved from ice. Banners in the colors of the iron fong, black and steel, snapped in the wind. It was the most beautiful thing Elara had ever seen, which only made it more terrifying. Fairy tales had taught her one last thing: the prettiest places often held the darkest monsters. The beta shifted back into human form and yanked her down by the chain between her cuffs. "Move," he said. Not through the grand archway, where noble carriages rolled past, but down a narrow side path, past the kitchens and stables, into the castle's underbelly. The air grew colder with each step, the stone floors slick with moisture. They entered through a low iron door, into a chamber that smelled of lion fear. 5 other girls huddled together inside, eyes wide, their travel clothes soaked and torn. One clutched a broken necklace like a talisman. Another's hand still shook from holding onto someone who hadn't been allowed to come. Elara kept her face blank and spine straight as the beta shoved her into the line. "Strip," a woman barked. She stood at the far end of the room, iron-gray hair pulled tight, amber wolf eyes sharp as knives. She wore the plain black of a senior servant, but her posture spoke of authority. No one moved. "You belong to the king now," the woman continued, voice as cold as the stone around them. "Every scrap you thought was yours, including your dignity, is his. Strip. Now." One by one, the girls obeyed, shaking fingers clumsy with humiliation and cold. Elara folded her clothes with deliberate care before setting them aside. It was a small rebellion, refusing to treat her last possessions like rags. In the washing chamber, the woman ordered. They were herded into another room with drains cut into the floor. Buckets of water, so cold it might as well have melted from the high peaks, were dumped over their heads. Elara gasped when the first wave hit, the shock knocking the breath from her lungs. Rough hands scrubbed her with coarse soap until her skin burned. Her hair was washed twice and combed with no gentleness at all, as if they meant to drag out not just tangles but the memory of village dust. "The king will not have filth tracked into his halls," the gray-haired woman said, watching their misery with something like satisfaction. "Though I doubt any of you will last the month. He prefers better specimens." One girl started to cry quietly. "Save your tears," the woman snapped. "Alpha King Kalan is not known for mercy. Learn your place quickly, or you'll wish you'd died on the road here." They were given plain gray shifts that barely reached their knees, the fabric thin enough that the cold slipped through easily. Elara pulled hers over clean, raw skin and told herself the shivering was only from temperature, not fear. The rules came next. No looking a noble in the eye unless ordered. No entering the western wing. No speaking of what occurred behind certain doors. Obedience was survival. Curiosity was treason. "Tonight," the woman said at last, lowering her voice slightly, "one of you will serve the king's special guest." The words "special guest" carried a weight that made Elara's stomach knot. She imagined chained wolves, ancient horrors, or some foreign dignitary whose appetites were best not named. "The king himself will choose," the woman added, her gaze skating over them like a butcher assessing cuts of meat. "You will be presented shortly. Do not embarrass yourselves." They were led up a narrow stairwell into a polished antechamber. The floor gleamed like water. Wall sconces held flickering candles that made everything seem too bright, too sharp. Eyes on the floor, the woman hissed. A hand clamped on the back of Alara's neck, pushing her chin down until all she could see were her own bare feet on cold marble. From beyond the far doors came the sound of approaching steps. Heavy. Measured. A presence moved with them, the air growing thick, charged, restless. The gray-haired woman, so mocking moments ago, went rigid. Even her wolf eyes flickered with unease. His Majesty, Alpha King Kalen, a man's voice announced. Each step he took sent a faint vibration through the floor under Alara's feet. She stared at a tiny crack in the marble, focusing on it as her heart pounded so fiercely she thought they must all hear it. The new arrivals, Your Majesty, the same male voice said, every word wrapped in careful deference. For your special guests, requirements. Silence followed. Not the soft kind, but a heavy, assessing quiet. Alara could hear another girl's ragged breathing beside her, could feel the faint tremor of someone's legs shaking hard enough to vibrate the floor. They're all cowering, a deep voice said at last. It rolled across the room like distant thunder. No overt cruelty, no warmth either. Just, tired. How tiresome, he added. Something in the casual authority of that tone made it impossible not to imagine the face behind it. Alara's storyteller's mind, always hungry for images, conjured lines and shadows without permission, a hard mouth, sharp cheekbones, eyes like molten amber. Don't look, she told herself. Real kings never resembled the clean, shining heroes in her battered storybooks. Real kings killed people like her. Real kings ruled by fear because fear required less effort than justice. Still, curiosity clawed inside her like a living thing. Before she could stop herself, she lifted her gaze. Just a little. Just enough to see. He stood a few paces away. Taller than anyone in the room, broader than her village alpha, wearing midnight black that made his skin look almost luminous in contrast. His hair fell in dark waves to his shoulders, a single silver clasp holding part of it back. His face was infuriatingly close to every hero she'd ever imagined. Too perfectly carved to be real, like some forgotten god had sculpted him from cold marble and given up halfway through adding flaws. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Gold, not the dull amber of lesser wolves, but bright and ancient, something feral coiled behind them. Something to watch. Something that weighed everything, everyone, and found nearly all of it wanting. Those eyes snapped to her the instant she met them. Alara flinched and dropped her head so fast her neck twinged. Her pulse roared in her ears. Idiot. Stupid. You can't even manage obedience properly. Your Majesty, hurted the attendant, voice a little too tight. Have you made your selection? Alara felt his attention still on her. It settled like a hand at the nape of her neck. Heavy. Considering. She'll do it, he said. She didn't have to look to know his hand or gaze or gesture had singled her out. The door to the special guests' suite was bigger than the entrance to their cottage. It loomed at the end of a silent hall, thick oak reinforced with iron, the carvings on it so old the edges had been softened by decades of touch. 2 guards flanked it, both armed, both watching the door as if it might decide to open by itself. The same gray-haired servant stood beside Alara, lips twisted in a smirk that didn't quite hide the tremble in her hands. Please be the king's guest in whatever way he wishes, she murmured. Or tomorrow, you will be begging for a quick death. Even the guard's fingers tightened on his sword hilt when a low sound rolled from behind the wood. Something between a growl and a sigh. It wasn't a wolf's snarl. It was deeper. Older. The guard cleared his throat, avoided Alara's eyes, and pulled the door open. She was shoved inside. The door shut behind her with a final thud that sounded too much like a cell being locked. For a moment, she stood completely still, letting her eyes adjust. The room was enormous, a suite rather than a bedchamber. Rich scents tangled in the air, roasted meat, spiced wine, something floral, and underneath it all, something wild. Musk and iron and the faint crackle of magic. Torchlight flickered along stone walls hung with deep blue tapestries. A long table dominated the central chamber, spread with a banquet that could have fed her village for a week, roasted fowl glistening with fat, dark bread, berries gleaming like jewels. A mirror of polished glass stood in a corner. When Alara's gaze caught it, her reflection wavered slightly, as if the glass itself were reluctant to fix her in place. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is anyone there?" No answer. But the weight of being watched pressed between her shoulder blades. The air held something, not presence exactly, but expectation. She made herself walk deeper in. Past the table. Past the cold hearth. Toward a heavy velvet curtain that hung slightly askew over an archway. She pulled it back and stopped. The bed beyond was absurd. Wide enough to fit 3 grown wolves in their shifted forms, heaped with dark silk sheets and furs. It wasn't a place to sleep. It was a stage. Her stomach lurched. She didn't need someone to explain what was expected of special guest slaves in rooms like this. Her skin crawled at the thought, memories of her mate's disgusted touch flashing unbidden, useless. Broken. Can't even do this properly. On the bed lay a parcel wrapped in dark paper. Her name, her new name, she thought bitterly, because the king owned even that now, was written on a card in elegant, unfamiliar script. Elara, in ink that glinted like oil. Hands numb, she unwrapped the parcel. A gown spilled out, unlike anything she'd ever worn. Midnight blue, almost black, threaded with gold so fine it looked like someone had stitched constellations into the cloth. It was beautiful. Which only made it more horrifying. Like a shroud woven from stars. The temperature dropped. Not by a few degrees. The air itself tightened, the way it does in a room before a storm breaks. Every small hair along Alara's arms stood on end. From the shadows at the far end of the suite came a sound, the scrape of something heavy shifting on stone, the click of joint against joint, a low, effortful sound like breathing through pain. Put it on. The voice was wrong. Too deep. Too rough. Language forced through a mouth and throat not built for it. Each word vibrated through her bones rather than landed in the air. Elara swallowed hard. Why yes, she managed. Hands shaking, she retreated behind a carved screen to change. The gown slid over her skin like cool water, molding to her shape without laces or ties. When she reached for her own plain cord to tie her hair back, she saw another small object resting atop the screen. A collar. No, necklace, she corrected, but the thought stuck. It glittered with small, sharp diamonds, arranged like a line of stars meant to curve perfectly along a throat. Should I wear this too? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, closer this time, yes. Her fingers fumbled as she fastened it around her neck. The weight of it settled there like a hand she couldn't remove. She stepped out from behind the screen. The suite seemed empty. The long table, the gently swaying tapestries, the cold hearth, no figure waiting, no man, no wolf. "Please," the voice said, now behind her. "Eat." She flinched, then forced herself toward the table. She picked up a piece of bread because it felt safest. Her hand barely shook, but when she bit into it, the rich crust turned to dust in her mouth. Something moved at the edge of her vision. A shadow lengthened across the table. Not from any candle. Not from anything that obeyed light. "Do you like the dress?" the voice asked. "Yes," she said, because the alternative was silence, and silence felt dangerous. "It's very fine." "Stand." Her legs didn't want to obey. They did anyway. She rose slowly, turning when told, every instinct screaming at her to run even as her feet stayed planted. The creature stepped forward out of the darkest corner of the room. At first, her mind refused to make sense of what she saw. It tried to slot him into something familiar: oversized wolf, twisted bear, mythical beast from a half-remembered tale. None of it fit. He was too tall, his shoulders hunched to avoid striking the beams. Limbs not quite balanced right, one arm slightly longer, thick muscle knotted under a hide of matted fur and scaled patches that looked like old wounds frozen mid-heel. His face, gods, was a war between wolf, man, and something else: muzzle too long, teeth too many, eyes, golden. The same gold as King Kalen's, but brighter, rawer, full of pain and fury so deep it felt like a physical thing. Her lips parted. The scream that should have come never made it out. Instead, what broke free was a whisper. "Were you cursed?" The beast jerked back as if she'd struck him. "I'm sorry," she blurted, heat flushing her skin. "That was rude. I speak too much. I read too many stories, Anne." No, his voice was quieter now, though it still dragged over her bones like gravel. "How did you know?" She swallowed, fingers knotting in the fabric of the gown. "In the fairy stories I used to hide," she said slowly, "monsters are often made, not born." Silence stretched. Heavy. Thinking. "Tell me one," he said at last. So she did. She told him, haltingly at first, about a prince turned to thorns by a jealous witch. About a woman trapped in a tower who could weave moonlight into thread. About men who became stone and women who became rivers and the ways they were freed. As she spoke, her fear slowly softened into something else. The beast listened. Not politely, not impatiently, truly listened. His breathing changed with the rises and falls of her stories, his gaze sharpened at twists, his claws flexed at injustices. Hours slipped by, measured only by the slow guttering of candles. "Thank you for your company," he rumbled at last, voice almost reluctant. "You may go." Relief crashed over her so suddenly it almost knocked her off her feet. She had survived the night with nothing but her stories. Not her body. Not her womb. Just the one thing she'd always been told was worthless. She turned toward the door, ready to flee before he could change his mind. "Wait," the beast said. She stopped. "Will you be my wife?" The air left her lungs. Of all the things she'd expected, death, use, indifference, that question had never once crossed her mind. "I cannot," she whispered. The thought of those massive, twisted limbs touching her in a marriage bed sent cold panic racing down her spine, battling with the warmth of his earlier attention. The beast rose, looming. Then I have no use for you. The finality in his tone turned the chill to ice. If he sent her away, what then? Execution? Darker duties elsewhere in the castle? The king did not keep what bored him. Her mind, trained by years of stories, leapt desperately for something, anything, to change the shape of this moment. I have a riddle, she blurted out, words tumbling over themselves. From one of my tales. The beast's head tilted, enormous and oddly graceful. A riddle? I am held by those who cannot touch me, she said slowly, voice growing steadier with each line. Broken by those who never speak to me. Kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I? He regarded her in silence. Long enough for her to begin regretting everything. What is this? He growled at last. A riddle, she repeated, lifting her chin just a fraction. If you can solve it, then I will agree to be your wife. His eyes narrowed, golden light flaring in their depths. And if I cannot? Then, she swallowed. Then until you do, perhaps you will permit me to return. To tell you more stories. There. The smallest bargain. A thread she could live on a little longer. The beast watched her for a long time, as motionless as carved stone. Then his massive chest rose and fell in a slow exhale. Tomorrow night, he said at last. Do not be late. If you were Elara right now, standing in a cursed beast's chamber, having just gambled your future on a riddle, would you have said yes, or would you have dared to bargain like she did? Tell us in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss other interesting tales. The moment Elara stepped back into the stone servants' corridor after her first night with the beast, the world stopped. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor. Her damp hair clung to her neck. The thin gray shift felt even thinner now after hours spent telling stories in a room that wasn't supposed to have room for warmth. The other girls stared at her as if she had risen from a grave. One dropped the cup she was holding. It shattered, the sound loud, sharp, violent in the quiet chamber. But no one moved to pick it up. They just watched her. Alive. Whole. Walking. The senior servant, the iron-haired woman whose authority seemed carved from stone, grabbed Elara by the arm and dragged her into a small alcove behind a column. Her grip trembled. You're alive, she hissed. How? Elara blinked at her, still mentally in the beast's chamber, still hearing his voice as he asked her to be his wife. Still feeling the weight of that diamond collar around her throat. I told him stories, she said quietly. The woman stared at her as if she'd spoken in a dead language. Her jaw tightened sharply. Say nothing to anyone. Do you understand me? Nothing. Not a word about, yes, she said softly. He listened. Something flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like disbelief, or relief. And, Kalen said, his voice quieter now, he asked for you, tonight. Elara felt the room shift. Mira, the servant, tensed visibly. Beta Rourke's eyes widened. Kalen himself went still, as if the air between them had frozen. Then, expression sharpening to a cold, elegant disdain, he spoke again. I don't care if you go, he said suddenly. If he wants you, you'll go. His dismissal felt rehearsed, almost like armor. Elara bowed her head. If that pleases your majesty. Does it disturb you, he continued, stepping slightly closer, that I call him a monster? Her heart stuttered. His tone was goading. Testing. Your majesty may use any word he wishes, she replied. Not what I asked, he said. She exhaled softly. Even beasts deserve respect. Mira gasped. Beta Rourke dropped his gaze in shock. King Kaelin's expression sharpened with something that wasn't anger, but wasn't soft either. Respect, he repeated, voice a dangerous purr. That thing is a stain upon my castle. A curse upon my bloodline. I keep him alive because killing him would be too merciful. Elara's breath caught. The gown, he continued coolly, and the jewels, return them to Mira. You will wear nothing but what I provide. Everything under this roof belongs to me. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. But she bowed, voice steady. Yes, your majesty. He stepped close enough that she felt his breath stir the loose hair at her temple. And if you speak a single word, he whispered, to anyone about what happens beyond that door, I will know. And I will kill you myself. The words were soft. The threat was absolute. Elara bowed deeper. Understood, your majesty. He turned away sharply. Get her out of my sight. Why do you think King Kaelin reacted like that? Fear? Jealousy? Or something darker? Comment your thoughts, and hit subscribe so you won't miss what's coming. Because the truth behind the curse is about to break this story open. That night, Elara returned to the beast's chambers. The guard didn't look at her at all this time. Not even a quick glance. As if he feared that looking might somehow draw the creature's attention. The moment she stepped inside the suite, the candles flared to life. A gown awaited her again. Deep burgundy this time, embroidered with silver threads that shimmered like frost under firelight. She changed behind the screen with trembling hands, wondering how a creature so monstrous could choose something so exquisite. The beast stood near the table when she emerged, massive shoulders hunched, claws tapping a slow rhythm against the wooden chair. You returned, he said. Yes. Good. A rumble almost like satisfaction underlined the word. Sit. She sat. You brought a story? I wrote one today, she said. Something moved in his eyes. Something like wonder. She read to him. 4 hours. He stopped her sometimes. That character is foolish, he would rumble. Why does the prince trust the villain? This ending is unsatisfying. And she would argue back. It's realistic. Characters can grow. Endings don't always have to be perfect. He listened. He debated. He cared. And it was terrifying how safe she felt speaking to someone who could crush her with a single swipe of his claws. One night, he asked. Do you ever write stories about yourself? No, she said quickly. Why not? Because no one would want to hear them. He stared at her for a long time. I would, he said. Her breath shook. What would you want to know? Everything. She laughed softly. Everything would take too long. I have time. For the first time, she told someone her truth. Not the pretty version. Not the polite one. The raw one. I was cast aside, she said, voice soft. By my mate. By my father. I failed in ways my world doesn't forgive. You were cast aside because they are fools, the beast said, voice thick with fury he couldn't hide. Not because you failed. She looked down. You know what my body refused to do, she whispered. You know what my greatest shame is. Your womb is not your worth, he snarled. His claws scraped the chair. His chest heaved. His monstrous form trembled with emotion too big for his body. You are more than what you can create with your body, he growled. You create worlds with your words. Her breath caught. No one had ever said something like that to her. No one had ever seen her like that. His next words were soft. Elara, will you be my wife? She closed her eyes. I am held by those who cannot touch me, she whispered, delivering the riddle again, voice trembling for reasons she didn't dare name. Broken by those who never speak me. Kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I? His shoulders slumped. Defeat washed over his monstrous features. She left that chamber with something heavy and aching in her chest. And when she lay down that night, staring into the darkness, she finally understood why the ache frightened her more than the beast ever had. She was beginning to care. The days that followed changed everything. She woke one morning not to be ordered to scrub floors but to be led to a small writing chamber. A desk. Blank parchment. Ink. Quills. A room of her own, more than she had ever been given in her life. A gift, Mira muttered unwillingly. From His Majesty. To prepare you for your nightly duties. Elara pressed her fingers to the smooth parchment and felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever given her time. Or pages. Or space. She wrote all day. And when she came to the beast that night, she brought the first story she had ever written about herself. The beast listened without speaking. When she finished, he said quietly, "You are precious." Her breath shook. "A woman like me is worth more than queens," he said. And then, softer. "Worth more than kingdoms." Something fragile inside her cracked. He asked again, "Elara, will you be my wife?" Her heart beat too fast. She whispered the riddle one last time. He lowered his head in defeat. She walked out, chest tight, her pulse trembling. That night, she couldn't sleep. Something kept pulling her thoughts back to him. The beast who hated himself. The beast who listened to her. The beast who gave her books and pages and time. The beast who saw her. The first person who ever had. Hours passed. The moon drifted. The sky lightened. She understood then, with a sharp, almost painful tenderness, that she had fallen in love with him. Not in the way fairy tales promised. Not with a handsome prince who rode horses and wore crowns. She loved the mind behind the monstrous form. The heart behind the curse. The soul behind the sorrow. Before she could talk herself out of it, she slipped silently from the servants' quarters and walked the familiar corridor to the beast's chamber. She eased the door open. He lay sleeping on the giant bed, massive body curled slightly, breathing deep. She stepped closer. "Beast," she whispered. "I came to say yes." That's when the sun broke. The first ray touched his body. And the beast convulsed. Elara stumbled back as bones cracked, shifting violently beneath fur that shrank into skin. Muscles twisted. His form contorted. His muzzle shortened into a human mouth. Fur vanished. Claws turned to hands. Scales dissolved. The transformation was violent, grotesque, familiar, yet new. This time she wasn't watching a beast become a beast. She was watching a beast become a man. And when the final shudder passed, lying there in the soft gold of dawn, chest rising and falling, hair spilling like black silk across the pillow, was King Kaelin. Perfect. Beautiful. Mortal. Her breath caught. She reached out a trembling hand, fingertips hovering inches from his cheek. His eyes snapped open. For one heartbeat, he looked at her with such pure joy that it stole her breath. Then he understood what she'd seen. And everything inside him broke. "You weren't supposed to know," he said, voice hollow. "Your Majesty." "Don't call me that," he said sharply, pain cracking through his tone. "Kaelin," she whispered. "You're the beast," he finished bitterly. "A curse I earned." He sat up slowly, shoulders sagging with defeat. "The witch split me. Day and night. Beauty and monstrosity. A king everyone fears. A beast everyone pities." He looked away from her. "You were never meant to see both." "Kaelin," she said, stepping closer, the truth blazing through her chest. "I came to say yes, before I knew." He flinched. "No," he whispered. "Now it's tainted. You know the king and the beast are the same. You can't love one without the other. But it doesn't matter." His voice cracked. "You should go." She felt it then. A dual grief. The beast is losing her. The king pushed her away. She left the room with her heart in ruins. By afternoon, a carriage carried her away from the castle. Away from Kaelin. Away from the beast she loved. Elara's story isn't over. Because love this deep does not break, it becomes destiny. Before we continue, tell us in the comments. Do you believe the king pushed her away to protect her, or to punish himself? Elara lasted 3 weeks in the quiet cottage at the forest's edge before she realized silence could be crueler than chains. For the first time in her life, she had everything she used to dream about. A room of her own. A small hearth. A view of the eastern hills. A shelf of books gifted by the king's gold once she was dismissed. Paper. Ink. Time. Everything except the one thing she truly wanted. Kaelin. She wrote from sunrise to sunset, her quill scratching across pages in desperate hunger to fill the void he had left behind. Stories poured out of her, stories of cursed princes and broken queens, of monsters who hid souls under fangs, of kings who were both beautiful and unbearable. But every story collapsed halfway through. Because she was writing for someone who wasn't there anymore to challenge her twists or argue about character arcs or ask the quiet questions that made her think. She had left behind the only place she had ever been seen. One late summer morning, the baker's wife delivered the news that ripped the earth from under her feet. "You've heard, I suppose," the woman said, unable to hide the gleam of gossip in her voice. "The royal wedding." Elara's fingers tightened on the bread in her hands. "Wedding?" "Oh yes," the baker's wife continued eagerly. "Alpha King Kaelin is to wed the princess of the Eastern Territories. The ceremony will be public. Grand. They say he's found the perfect mate. Elara's heart splintered. Perfect. Was that what she hadn't been? She returned to her cottage and sat at her writing desk long after her tea went cold, staring at nothing. She should have been happy for him. He was a king. He deserved alliances. A kingdom needed heirs. A queen who could give him strong pups. She, barren as stone, could offer none of that. But the truth was sharp. She had wanted to give him something deeper than heirs. She had wanted him. So when the wedding day arrived, and the kingdom prepared for celebration, Elara laced herself into her simple blue gown, tied back her hair, and walked to the town square. Not to interfere. Not to plead. But to see him one last time. The square had transformed into a festival of brilliance. Banners of silver and deep indigo fluttered from balconies, flowers strung across every archway. Wolves shifted between forms, guards stood at full alert, and the murmuring crowd buzzed with hope for a new era of peace. Elara stayed at the far edge of the square, half hidden behind a line of villagers. No one recognized her. No one saw her heart beating like a frantic bird inside her ribs. She only had eyes for the king. Kaelan walked through the aisle created for him, flanked by high-ranking nobles. His wedding cloak shimmered midnight blue, embroidered with silver sigils of the Iron Fang dynasty. His dark hair shone in the sun. His golden eyes stayed fixed ahead. He was perfection carved into flesh. A king born for paintings. A ruler destined for legends. But when he reached the altar and lifted his gaze across the crowd, his eyes found her. Shock splintered his expression. For one devastating heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. The world narrowed to two people across a sea of bodies. Her lips trembled into a small, soft smile. A goodbye. His jaw tightened. Pain flared in his gaze, raw, unguarded, too honest for a king in front of his court. He tore his gaze away with visible effort, turning to face the princess. The officiant lifted the ceremonial staff. The vows began. And Elara felt her heart collapse inside her chest. She tried to breathe. Tried to remind herself why she had come. Tried to convince herself she wasn't foolish for standing here. But something in the crowd snagged her attention. A man. Broad-shouldered. Moving not like a spectator but like a predator stalking prey. His gaze wasn't on the ceremony. It was on the guards, the strategic exits. Another man, farther right, did the same. Hand near a hidden blade. And another. And another. Cold fear shot through her. The princess lifted her hand for the vow ring. The officiant began the final words. And the world cracked open. A scream cut through the air, sharp, panicked, silencing everything. The first attacker lunged toward the royal dais, a concealed sword flashing. Guards sprang into action, blades unsheathed in a single metallic roar. People scattered like frightened birds. Wolves shifted mid-leap, snarls ripping the air. "Protect His Majesty," someone shouted. The crowd surged. Elara was shoved to the ground. From her position on the cobblestones, the world became a chaotic blur. Claws met steel. Wolves collided in vicious grapples. Blood splashed against the stone. And Kaelan fought like a fire incarnate. He didn't shift. Not yet. Not in daylight. But he moved with a sharp, predatory grace that reminded Elara of the beast's movements, the same lethal precision, the same instinct to protect. He struck like lightning, his sword cutting arcs of bright silver. And he was about to die. A shadow moved above him, on a rooftop. An archer. Bow drawn. Arrow aimed at Kaelin's unprotected back. Elara didn't think. She ran. She launched herself forward, slamming into Kaelin just as the arrow sliced through the space where his heart had been. They hit the ground together. He turned, eyes wide, breath unsteady. Elara, he whispered. You were about to be. He pulled her behind him sharply. Stay behind me. His beta, Rourke, appeared, blood streaking his face. Your Majesty, the sun, there's no time. Kaelin froze. The sun hung low, just touching the horizon. Elara's heartbeat still. If the curse took hold now, in the center of the kingdom, surrounded by civilians, nobles, enemies, everything would be lost. Kaelin, you have to go, she whispered urgently. He didn't move. A massive wolf tackled her suddenly, its jaws snapping inches from her throat. Another rebel stood beside it, blade raised. Stand down, Your Majesty, the man snarled, or she dies. Kaelin's face contorted with terror. Let her go. The wolf pressed its weight harder onto Elara's chest. Rourke tugged at Kaelin's arm. My lord, please, the sun. Let her go, Kaelin demanded, voice trembling with rage. But then the sun dipped fully below the horizon. The transformation struck him like a blow. He staggered. His sword slipped from his grasp, clattering against the stone. His body convulsed violently, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. The crowd gasped, horrified, as bones cracked and limbs twisted. The king everyone feared became the beast no one understood. The wedding cloak tore apart as black fur erupted. Scales flared across his shoulders. His face elongated into a grotesque muzzle. His claws dug trenches into the stone beneath him. The crowd screamed. Princess Theria fainted. Nobles fled. Guards recoiled. But Elara. She saw him. Not the monster. The man. Her beast. Her Kaelin. And he saw her. With a roar that shook the square, the beast hurled himself at her captor. Wolves leapt to stop him. He tore through them like a storm made flesh. Blood sprayed. Bones cracked. Shadows danced beneath him. Elara felt no fear. Not of him. Never of him. The beast fought until the last attacker was crushed beneath his claws. And then he staggered, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. He sank to one knee. Elara, he growled, his voice a mangled mixture of monster and man. Are you safe? She stepped forward without hesitation, cupping his muzzle in her hands as if he weren't covered in blood and battle. I'm safe, she whispered. Because of you. His breath hitched. I am sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry they saw you. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry for everything. The beast shook his head weakly. Blood dripped onto the stones. I don't care what they saw, he rasped. I only care that you live. And she said it then. The truth she'd carried in silence. The truth that had followed her through sleepless nights and broken pages. I love you, she said softly. Beast or king. I love you. something happened in the air. A hum. A pulse. A glowing, rising heat like summer lightning. The beast shuddered. Light erupted from within him, bursting under his skin, flooding outward in blazing waves that lit the entire square. The transformation took hold, but this time, it wasn't violent. It was gentle. Fur dissolved into light. Scales into gold dust. Claws into shimmer. Grotesque limbs smoothed, softened, reshaped. The curse wasn't just reversing. It was breaking. When the light dimmed, King Kalan knelt on the blood-stained stone, whole, beautiful, mortal again, even though the moon hung high in the sky. His wound was gone. His breathing is steady. He looked at his hands, clean, unmarred, and then at her. "I don't understand," he whispered. Elara smiled, her tears catching light. "The curse said," she murmured, "that only a love stronger than what is born for a king would free you." He shook his head slowly. "I thought I needed someone who could love the beast." "No," she said gently. "You needed to love someone more than you loved being king. More than your pride. More than your fear." Realization rippled across his face. "When I chose you over hiding the curse," he whispered. "When I risked the kingdom's terror. You became free," she finished. Kalan rose slowly, his legs trembling. "Elara," he breathed. He reached for her. She reached back. And in the shattered wreckage of his wedding, surrounded by toppled banners and ruined flowers, she fell into his arms. He held her like someone who had been drowning for years and finally found air. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "Beast and king. All of me is yours." She pressed her forehead to his. "And all of me is yours." The kingdom watched. They didn't cheer. They didn't flee. They simply saw their king, not as a monster or a tyrant, but as a man who had suffered under a curse and been freed by love. Some stories change kingdoms. This one had just begun. 1 year later, the Iron Fang ballroom shimmered with candlelight and music. Wolves and humans danced together without fear or hierarchy. Gone were the days of whispering servants and cowering villagers. Queen Elara stood at the edge of the celebration, watching her husband move through the crowd. Kalan smiled easily now, something the kingdom still wasn't used to seeing. People bowed to him not in fear, but in respect. Children tugged at his cloak, and he knelt to speak with them. The elders pressed blessings into his palm. The kingdom had reshaped itself around the truth. And Elara, once called defective, wolfless, barren, now bore 2 healthy babies sleeping in the nursery upstairs. Twins. Miracles. Maybe curses break bones, but love remakes the body. Kalan spotted her and crossed the room, cupping her cheek with reverent fingers before drawing her into a soft kiss. "Dance with me," he murmured. She smiled. "Always." As they moved to the center of the floor, a diplomat approached Kalan with a laugh. "A riddle for the king," the man teased. "They say you're fond of puzzles." Kalan smirked. "Go on." The diplomat cleared his throat. "I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak to me, and kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" Kalan's gaze flicked to Elara. His smile softened into something only she ever saw. "A promise," he answered simply. The diplomat nodded approvingly and drifted away. Elara blinked up at him. You knew my riddle. All this time? Since the first night, he said, smirking slightly. But you pretended you didn't. He pulled her closer, forehead touching hers. I didn't want to force you, he whispered. I wanted you to choose me, curse and all. She touched her nose. And I did. You did, he echoed softly. My queen. My storyteller. My fate. And as they danced in the golden light, the king who had once been a beast, and the girl who had once been called worthless, held each other like a promise kept. If you loved this journey, from heartbreak to destiny, hit subscribe so you never miss another enchanted tale. And tell us in the comments, which moment in this story stayed with you the most? Your engagement helps this channel grow, and this community of magic grows with it.